everybody. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. This is Echoes of War. I'm joined here by my co-host Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Greg, wonderful to be up here and really looking forward to an episode where I had to go back to middle school history for me.
Yeah. So a long time ago, I suggested at some point we should do the histories of our countries, and we've accidentally done that with these two episodes, pretty much. We are, of course, continuing the 7 Years' War series, and this is going to be the India theater. It encompasses, to my knowledge, because I am very clueless about most of this history, the Third Carnatic War is a large part, if not the whole thing, kind of.
It's one of the two major components as I like to break it up. Because I'm also going to talk about the British conflict in Bengal,
Yeah.
which it happened in the same time frame, 1757 onwards. So I'm going to keep it concurrent with the events of the 7 Years' War. But this is the events that mark the British taking a much stronger foothold in, the Indian subcontinent.
But before we jump into it, I want to remind everybody who hasn't already checked us out on YouTube. I'm pretty confident in saying we're going to be on a new YouTube channel. It's going to be the Kings and Generals podcast channel over on YouTube. And a reason to check us out there is we're going to have extensive maps. If you do not know the geography of India, for example, this might help you. We're going to have, some battle portraits of key figures we're going to be talking about and such. And it's much more of a documentary feeling. We want to have like a firm hold on YouTube because, well, to be honest, there's a lot more room to grow there. And also, of course, if you'd like to further support the channel, consider checking out the YouTube membership over at the Pacific War Channel or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to an exclusive podcast series. I'm just finishing up episode 34, which is it was originally supposed to be a look at how alliances led to World War One, but I've accidentally turned it into an entire history going back to Westphalia all the way up to the July Crisis, and it's extremely extensive. I'm afraid people might find it a bit boring because it's a lot of realpolitik and stuff, but that's coming out soon. You also get early access to all the content I'm making. Today, I might be putting up the Marco Polo Bridge incident, which is going to kick off the Pacific War Channel's second Sino-Japanese War for the next God knows how many years. And you get voting rights for subjects I'll tackle next. After that shameless plug, Gaurav, I don't know where you'll start because I don't know much about
All
any
right.
of this.
Okay. So I'm going to follow a similar script on how you led the first North America episode in setting the stage. Because I think it's pretty important we set this context. So we're going to put the major players that are operating in India, you could say, at this point of time, both from the domestic nations, because not surprisingly, what we know as the Republic of India today did not really exist in the shape we know it as. I'm probably going to get lynched.
I mean, as an Indian friend told me here once, like it much like China, India is not like a thing,
It's
really.
not.
It was just a
I
ton
know.
of different kingdoms, different languages, and then people came over and forced you people just to
There's
be this
there's a
thing. So yeah,
there's a reason we have 26 official languages.
yeah.
All right. So I think we'll start with the domestic kingdoms. And one sec, I need to find. Oh shoot! One moment. I forgot to get the Mughal Empire map, but let's start with the Mughal Empire for sure because they were the largest empire. They were like at one point the preeminent empire, but around the time of its dissolution, like the events are taking place, it's now become a minor power. So, Craig, I just want to ask, do you know anything of the Mughal Empire from your knowledge? Just, I don't know, just to
It's
test you.
I just know that it was the one of the largest empires in India, and that I think it was beginning to wane when Europeans began coming about.
That is actually pretty accurate. I'm just trying
It's
to
kind of
find.
comparative to North America. The what we call the Haudenosaunee, well, the Iroquois Confederacy. They went through one of their biggest wars, which was the Morning Wars, and it was extremely bloody. Things were getting really bad. It was getting very violent in North America, and that's exactly the same time the Europeans started to show up, and yeah, put a dent in it.
Yeah, just one moment. I'm just bringing up the image. This was the territorial extent of the Mughal Empire in under Emperor Aurangzeb.
Mhm.
Uh, at his height, it was the largest the empire ever got to, and as you can see, pretty much comprised of what we know today as India,
Yeah.
with bits of Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan all added in. Now, the Mughal Empire also operated very similarly to most empires in the sense you had these key provinces where you would have powerful lords who would take over. They would only be answerable to the emperor, and you can see a couple of them examples. Awadh here was also a major province. You had Bengal, and then you had Hyderabad down here, which that's actually my birth city.
Oh.
So, so kind of think of it, and they had a lot of autonomy. I don't know. I think the proper most equal comparison would be comparing them to the Roman provincial governors during the emperor's reigns. But they also have that kind of autonomy, especially after the decline of the Mughals. That you could compare them to being the elected states of the Holy Roman Empire as well. So I think that's one way to put it. Now, before Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan, Jahangir, right, Akbar, these four emperors together between for 150, they reigned for 150 years. The empire was prosperous. It was rich as hell. You know, trade, arts, everything flourished, and Aurangzeb just kind of also went on a big war, destructive uh, reign of terror, you could say. Now, how did it decline? Well, the simple answer is well, too many sons fighting for the throne.
Mm.
And so, after Aurangzeb dies in 1707, uh, his son, tries to stabilize the administration, but that guy dies 5 years into his reign. And in the successors start fighting. In the year of 1719 itself, we had the Mughal equivalent of the year of the four emperors.
Okay.
So, and that was between various shahs, and then there was this faction called the Saeed brothers, and who kind of not they were like kind of becoming the shadow puppeteers. The Rajputs who are in this region around Ajmer and all, right? They were a proud warrior case confederacy, you could call them, because they also had their own kingdoms. They also absolutely bickered with each other. They also began their rebellion, and the Deccan region kind of started to, that is, the southern half of the empire started to kind of pull away from central authority. And it also coincided with the rise of the Maratha Empire. They were like a like a coalition of units here in Maharashtra. And at the time of these events, they are the preeminent power in India. Because by this time, the Mughal emperor is just more of a figurehead. He starts losing power like pretty drastically, but there is still a sort of reverence to that title, because even when there was this great revolt in 1857 by the Indians against the British rule, the figurehead of the rebellion was the Mughal emperor, and
Oh.
then he was completely after the rebellion was crushed down, that title was completely taken away. But keynote, they're completely on the brink. They are just going to go. The empires had 150 years of greatness, and then 150 years completely downhill.
Hmm.
The various nawabs, which are like the provincial governors, kind of just do their own thing now. So that is just going to leave. Now, the emperors kind of had like a lukewarm kind of reaction. They were controlling the Europeans. But now, when you have such weak governments, the European trade companies are definitely taking their interest in what is going on. But before I get into the Marathas, I'll just bring up the province of Bengal, or as they call it, the Bengal Subha. Just one moment. Just gonna share something new. Now, this patch of land, from a European perspective, has been with the British and the Dutch,
Okay.
in the sense that their interests are here. It's one of the British interests. Let me just say that. Sorry, I think that's a proper term. But as I mentioned, they are part of those Mughal provincial governors who became pretty powerful and then decided to, become their own place. And Bengal is really, really, really rich. I think the best way to um, suggest that was it alone was responsible for 20% of India's 20 to 25% of the Indian GDP at this time, which
Oof.
I think, Craig, if you remember in the 16th century, I've seen this graph somewhere. I think the Mughals had like I think the second largest GDP in the world after Ming China. This
Just
region
before the Ming
is like
fall. Yeah.
this region is 25% of that second largest GDP in the world. So it's a pretty lucrative place, right? And why it was a great tax revenue, because the soil was really good. Because the famous Sundarbans Delta, where people go to see the tigers, that's around here on the map.
Hmm.
That's it's a great the Ganges and the Brahmaputra River empty. If you have great agriculture, that's great taxation. And this was like the bread basket. So just think of it like what Egypt was for the Roman Empire, right? It's a bread basket. It was a center of trade, especially for silk, uh, and obviously with a lot of riverine networks. It was also a major naval hub for the Mughal navy, since you had extensive coastal waterways to patrol, and it was also the place where the Dutch had 40% of their imports going through. So this is like, I guess, what we could say is like the Nawabs becoming independent. And by the 1720, after 1717, they kind of just declared their autonomy, and they become the Nawabs. So just think of them as like Grand Dukes or something, and they started the
Yeah.
industrialization. And I think this is a great example. I just saw this. The GDP equivalent of this region was about 14 billion and the ninth largest in the world in the year 1700.
Wow.
So yeah, this is just the Bengal realm, I'll call it. Next, we have one sec. I'm just trying to, yeah. So I figured out a trick is if you scroll to the tabs before, it kind of just gets what you want up to the top when you share. So we have the Maratha Empire, and the Marathas were a proud warrior race from as you could guess, Maharashtra, and they would be fighting the Mughals. After the death of Aurangzeb, their rulers, they were, despite having hostages, they moved up very aggressively in trying to take control of the Deccan region, that is like central to southern India. And this was after pretty clever maneuvering, they had a great cavalry army, and they took a really expansionist policy. They had multiple family leaders leading several invasion columns across that would expand the realm here. Now, uh, as you can see, they were pretty large, but their power was relatively short lived, if you would ask me. Because while not directly related to this episode, I'll just leave this out. There is the Third Battle of Panipat, which is an utter fiasco and disaster for the Maratha armies. And it cost them a lot in their leadership and manpower and morale loss. And this also coincides with the rise of the British in India as a force. They've not had a great relationship with the British and Portuguese. They've the Maratha navy and army, not to the large extent of in terms of numbers of how they fought in their expansion wars, but they have had conflicts with the British, East India Company fleets, the Portuguese as well, and but they were very friendly to the French actually.
Hmm.
So I think the best way is the Marathas. They kind of just restricted the Portuguese to the Goa region, which is one of their first areas. And till this day, the Portuguese influence is still very strong in the state of Goa. It's somewhere
Hmm.
around here. They love the French, though primarily because they realized that the British are the biggest threat, so they needed a counter to it. And the French actually, typical of many enemies of the British, they employed the Marathas employed the French military officers into their army to
Yeah.
kind of help with the training and reorganization, get used to the upgraded European artillery style.
I was just wondering, I don't know if you can answer this. Domestic weapons manufacturing, are they capable of producing like modern weaponry for the age, or
Mm, I don't think it was as advanced as the rifles that we've seen. There's still definitely a heavy emphasis on melee combat. Artillery
are
was
they going to
quite
be?
outdated.
I guess they would be reliant on trade then with French or Portuguese, whatever it would be.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And
Hmm.
again, as I said, melee is still heavily focused here. Like,
Oh
if
yeah,
you
of
remember
course. This
when
time, yeah.
we and they had much larger cavalry armies than what you would see in Europe. Marathas were
Hmm.
predominantly that. So I think they are definitely behind the curve. You could say that perhaps, I guess, loosely speaking, you could call them equivalent to the Tokugawa shogunate in terms of their firearms capabilities. Definitely not to the muskets that are being used in Europe right now.
Okay, yeah, that's a good equivalent, I guess. So the Kagoshima rifle, yeah, yeah.
But unfortunately, the French were just not really interested because if you remember, French military policy was focusing on the continent, whereas Britain focused on the colonies.
Yeah.
So the Marathas actually wanted to form an alliance, but it never went through. But yeah, I think that is with the Marathas. They are not going to be too relevant, but keep in mind that this is the major power. The Mughals are kind of like around some of their lands are occupied here, and then Bengal, and then Awadh, as I mentioned, and this is the the Nizam of Hyderabad as well, like his realm.
Hmm.
They Now these three realms kind of, except for Bengal, they kind of technically sworn their allegiance to the Mughal Emperor, but who cares about that, right? You don't need that shit anymore. So I think this should set up our major Indian kingdoms because while It's not going to happen for this war. The kingdom of Mysore, which is down here, is just small under the Marathas. So we are not going to get into them, and they don't partake in this particular episode. And Craig, maybe you'd like to share something of the English East India Company.
Yeah, sure. Here, let me toss up a generic map just so that there's something there. Not that it's totally relevant. So Gaurav asked me to try and look at a bit of the history between we'll call it the British trade and then the French trade. So I did a pretty concise under 400 words thing. I'll try and make it short. But the British presence in India began commercial, not really political. Of course, the East India Company received its royal charter at the turn of the 17th century, and this authorized English merchants to trade in the East Indies. In practice, this meant establishing fortified trading posts and factories rather than conquering any territory. The earlier emphasis was on textiles, calicos and chintz from textile-rich regions, and of course, it was all for spices, also precious metals, indigo, other things that they would sell back in Europe. By the 1610s and 1620s, the company secured footholds along the western coast. So Surat became the first major factory. That was in 1612. It served as a hub for overland and sea routes into the subcontinent's interior. In the 1630s and 40s, this saw the establishment of Madras. They had Fort St. George there. Later, they fortified Bombay. And
Yep, Bombay is my favorite city in India.
There you go.
I lived there for 20 years, obviously.
Gave a lot of royal gifts. They got a lot of charters. Bombay was ceded to the crown in the 1660s. And then there was Calcutta, which they put Fort William in, and they developed later as a strategic outpost on the eastern side, tying British interest into the rich markets of Bengal. Across these outposts, the company relied on negotiated frameworks with the Mughal authorities and regional polities, leveraging firm-based permissions and local trade networks while maintaining a military and naval presence to protect their trade routes against competing Europeans. So at the beginning, this is primarily the Dutch and the Portuguese. And for those who know the histories of China, Japan, Southeast Asia, and all that, it's actually very, very similar. Kind of the same overall stories going on. The 18th century, this intensified the commercial and political dimensions for the British. The Mughal Empire, though weakening, remained an unofficial gatekeeper, as Gaurav has alluded to, for large-scale Indian commerce, and Indian merchants, alongside the other Indian rulers, participated in a very complex system of tariffs, gifts, and pacts. The Carnatic conflicts, notably the wars of the mid-1740s to the mid-1750s, pitted the British and French commercial interests against each other, as much as against other Indian powers. Yet the British steadily expanded their foothold in Bengal and southern India through commercial leveraging.
I'm just going to bring up a map. I think just going to...
Yeah, go for it.
Show.
I didn't have a good map for the British one. I have a better one for the French.
I think this is a great example of how the East India Company actually expanded its control over India. So, as you correctly alluded to, while Surat here was a major factory, there three bastions of power would be Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. Now, they have their Indian names now, so it's like Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata. But these were like their fortresses, their hubs. And these were all fairly large ports, which naturally, given Britain's reliance on the sea, it definitely makes sense to fortify the forts.
Yeah,
the ports.
And of course, it's not just here. The British are doing an identical thing in China. They're trying in Japan, although Japan was kind of a weird nut to crack, and other parts of Southeast Asia and such. So it's honestly, it's the same breakdown of how things happen. You can consider North America identical as well, except it's just much larger and lessly sparse with populations. But by the time of the 7 Years' War, the East India Company, it's beginning to tip in their balance, I'd say. They had they transformed from just being like this trading company into the de facto political actor in the region with a network of fortified trading posts, inland connections, and growing revenues from textiles. And
It's.
opium, got to mention the
I was
the
going to
opium.
get to that.
Yeah,
If
I
I'm
mean
not
that's what
mistaken,
I
the
actually know
opium.
about. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, the opium was grown in like the northern plains of India, right? I mean, I think you might know where they were grown.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The British just figured out one day, they're like, wow, the soil in India is perfect for this cultivation. And yeah, where are we going to trade it? China.
Well, this is why I say tea is greater than coffee because no one went to war for coffee, but they definitely went to war for tea.
Absolutely went to war for tea. It it is unbelievable when you think about everything that was involved. Can't get into it in this episode, but at some point we're gonna have to do an Opium Wars series because it'll be like the third time I've told the story, and I think we can hit it pretty
I'm
hard.
definitely.
I
Yeah,
love the Opium
I'm
Wars; one of my
going.
favorite. Yeah. Oh, here I
Listen,
want to
the war
switch.
for tea. War for tea.
The, switch up the map to this. I just have one map that
Sure.
surprised the hell out of me because I had no knowledge of this history. But this is a map of what was the French influence. This is just prior to
Yeah.
the 7 Years' War. So to translate, Limité des territoires français is like the real territories of the French, whereas the lighter teal, I guess, color, it's their allies. So the influence they have through
It's
their
like their
allies.
influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But very much more significant than I ever imagined. I thought France would have like very small holdings or any influence here. So a little bit about the history of France. So France's entry into the Indian trade was driven by state-supported commercial visions designed to just basically be the rival to the English in the Indian Ocean and the subcontinent. Because that's what the French do. They just figure out what Britain's doing and try and screw them over. That's French history in a nutshell. In 1664, Colbert and the French crown organized a dedicated French East India Company, real original. C'est la campagne
I'm going to
française pour
tell
la
just
commerce
one,
des Indes orientales. Quoi? Yeah.
uh, just one thing. Technically, the French company that's operating here for the French
Mhm.
possessions, it's kind of like the third incorporation of the French East Indies Company.
Oh,
Yeah, the first one just lasted 4 years, then 1664, and then what was operating now was it was a reorganization of of a company following the termination of John Law's monetary exemption, and
okay.
that formed the basis for the current French Indies company that is operating here,
Hmm. All right, so they
who
failed
had a
once.
great motto of "I will flourish wherever I will be brought."
Hmm. All right. So yeah, the Campagne française pour le commerce des Indes orientales. Of course, that's a long one. We'll just call it the French East India Company. They began to establish direct trading links with India and Southeast Asia, which I mean I know quite a bit about like Vietnam, Cambodia, and all that would happen there. So yeah, the French were not as not very nice in Southeast Asia. I'll say that much. The aim was to secure spices, textiles, indigo, pepper, precious metals, while creating a strategic foothold that could translate into royal prestige and geopolitical influence because they just wanted to have what the British had, a growing empire. The French quickly established a network of coastal factories and settlements designed to control the trade routes and supply lines. Uh, Bond, okay, in English, you pronounce it Pondicherry.
Yeah, Pondicherry. Yeah,
Okay, because I have like the French writing in mind, so it's
yeah,
Pondicherry.
yeah.
Became a principal hub from 1674 onwards, serving as a secure commercial base and a staging ground for diplomacy with the Indian rulers. So I guess this is kind of their most fortified place.
Yeah, it was their bastion of power.
Okay.
It's like nice town. I've just visited once. I'll just add this little tidbit of facts. In around the time of the start of the War of Austrian Succession,
Mm,
in terms of global revenue, the British and French East Indies companies were approximately similar in revenue. They
really?
were,
Wow.
yeah, they were generating an annual sales of 21 to 25 million French livres. I don't have the kind of current conversion to kind of state what it was, but it's pretty large.
Mm,
The but they were still behind the Dutch East Indies Company, which was at 30 million.
okay. There's also Chandinagar. followed on the Hooghly near Kolkata, with Mai and the Malabar as another strategic enclave. Sorry if I mispronounced some of these places. I have a French writing for these places also, so it's kind of confusing. These settlements were supported by forts, warehouses, and a cadre of administrators, merchants, and sailors who all would integrate into local markets and this aristocratic network. The French trade thrived within a highly competitive space that included Indian merchants, the Mughal state, and crucially, the British East India Company. The French distinguished themselves by cultivating alliances with Indian princes, most notably in the Deccan and Carnatic regions, where Dupleix and other leaders pursued a policy of expansive diplomacy, such as alliances. These alliances would sometimes translate into advantageous trade arrangements, favorable transit, protection for their caravans or their ships, and preferential access to certain ports and such. The Carnatic Wars, which there's three to my understanding, and this
Yeah,
starts in like the early 40s, goes all the way up to the Seven Years' War. Optimized the French strategy. Trade was inseparable from military leverage and political influence. Dupleix sought to embroil rival powers in Indo-French alliances, hoping to channel India's princes' support into lucrative trading positions for the company. The British would counter this with their own alliances and superior naval presence, gradually eroding the French advantages. Yeah.
yeah. I thought I'd just bring up. So this is like when the Europeans established all their various outposts, you could call them. But yeah, I think this has now set the stage. And okay, I think one of the biggest reasons why Britain and what do you call the French are going to be fighting here is because of the policies adopted by the governments. If we remember, France is not going to be sending help, whereas Britain has finally got its political act together. And even though, what I actually find, also just want to say, this is the one area of the war where technically it's not like the government's fighting. They're
Oh yeah,
technically fronted by
yeah.
companies,
It's kind of, yeah, it's
though they
privateers
have,
and stuff. Yeah.
but they do have support. Uh, by 1758, the Pitt Newcastle government stabilized in Britain because the Duke of Newcastle wanted a heavier focus on the continent. William Pitt the Elder wanted a focus on the colonies. So the French are not going to get much help, like similar to North America, much to Craig's utter surprise. Just kidding. And the British are going to be getting a lot more supplies from Britain. So I think with that, uh, how we should start is probably we'll start with I'll call it the Bengal War, which is some conflicts between the Bengal province and the British, right? Where the French are not going to be involved here. I'm just going to keep this up so we can just see, like, the north. You could look at the upper right corner of the map in this case, around. And Calcutta is going to be the first major place. So this has been a trading post of the East India Company, which actually purchased three villages that were to form the bastion of this place. And as you mentioned a bit earlier, Craig, they constructed Fort William, which was to house the garrison. Now, where contention comes is taxation. The Mughal emperor in the interregnum of, the decline in 1717, he granted the East India Company the privilege that they are exempt from tax
Oof.
throughout Bengal. Now, this is a major trading outpost. Lot of money flows through. If you were a British East India Company official, you could just probably see yourself as Mr. Krabs, just saying money.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the regional governors, which were the Nawabs of Bengal was not very appreciative of this. As I mentioned, they are gonna just be declaring their independence, but generally the provincial governors, the Nawabs, have been very lukewarm at best to the European traders. They kind of let them intervene when needed, but mostly just try to keep them at an arm's length and tax them heavily because, well, money is honey, and also it's probably a way to keep their check in power. So what happens is when the previous Nawab of Bengal, which was a man by the name of Ali Wardi Khan, dies in 1756. He is uh, succeeded by his grandson, Siraj ud-Daulah, who, to put it like this, he does not like the British. He did not trust them, and he decides that Calcutta must be seized because there is a lot of money being stored there. And he wanted a pretext to drive the company from his lands. The first pretext was around the Kissindas, where the son of a high ranking official who had incurred his wrath uh, and the British East India Company kind of just like after the imprisonment let this disgraced official enter the city. And this is after the fact that this man would later join the political group that was opposing the grandson Sirajuddaullah's accession to power. Not really a great way to enamor yourself to your ruler, I guess. Uh, and because they kind of used to harbor this and spurn the demand that they give the this person and his fortune over, this kind of just fed into this initial distrust that this is they are planning something, right? It's kind of like similar for deception. If someone believes something, it really doesn't matter whatever you're going to do. Now, what happened, the second incident was when the company began construction of new fortifications, and this was not only the British but the French. And while they kept the British started kind of fortified their fort, Fort William, and this is just pretty much the item that tips the camel's back, you could say. Like, it's now he's like completely pissed off with the British, and he demands that all these guys take down the fortifications. The French say that they are not building anything; they're just repairing what was already existing. And the British East India Company, uh, they've kind of used some poorly worded choice of word, the poorly worded reply. They just said we are preparing for a future conflict. That's all they said. Now,
Very ambiguous.
yeah. And then there were rumors that the British were gathering an army in Madras to invade Bengal. So Siraj assembles a massive army that is 50,000 men strong and gives the letter to Roger Drake, who is the acting governor general of Calcutta, and it's just a declaration of war. And they take some outer fortifications with ease, and then the governor was an idiot, to say the least. He alienated all of his supporters. He could not take decisive action. And I can see right now Craig just thinking that this is deja vu of what happened with the French in North America.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like that.
Now, they did not have much, uh, and right now the Bengal Nawab's forces are only focused on the English. They are avoiding the French and Dutch, and neither send aid. And Madras also they try to he also what do you call reinforcements, but nothing comes. And this is when the Governor General Roger Drake, he finally says like to the Nawab, hey, I accept your terms, please. But now it's a failure. No one is. And the fort was never really repaired. It was in a horrible state of crumble, and a lot of places they actually even excavated gaps in the fort's walls to allow light and ventilation. So yeah, pretty
It's
a
not
grim
good.
situation that's going to happen. And there was also one British engineer who said, "Can we just demolish the buildings just outside the fort because it gives our soldiers the advantage to shoot?" And guess why his suggestion was rejected?
Because it would piss off the local population.
No, it did not belong to the locals. It belonged to the British administrators and their families, and they did not want their houses destroyed.
Oh, okay. Well, we should have destroyed
The,
them, but all
to
right.
be that yeah. And they get a militia that was hastily formed from young apprentices, crews of the various vessels, and the European population. So they literally prepare to defend the fort with 515 troops.
Hey guys, this is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. Please don't forget to check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account over at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel, where you can join the ranks and gain access to a hell of a lot of goodies. At the base minimum, you get access to the exclusive monthly podcast, early access to all of my content, voting rights for what subjects I will tackle next, and at higher tiers, I have much more goodies to come. So please click that link and check it out.
And some people did flee. And when the Nawab's army attacks on the 20th of June, they are all captured. And there is a gruesome incident that takes place. It is called the Black Hole of Calcutta. So this was the dungeon in the fort measuring 14 by 18 feet. And in this room, right, 14 by 18 feet, they put 146 prisoners for the night. Only 23 survived the night.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. Though some do say that they actually sent 64 prisoners and 43 died. But I still think the result was pretty much the same. Now, a lot of it, the first viewer account, like the first person account, is from a surgeon who was an employee of the British East India Company called John Holwell. And he said in his views, Holwell said the dungeon was a strongly barred room, and it was not intended for the confinement of more than 2 or 3 men at a time. There were only two windows and a projecting veranda outside, and thick iron bars within the impeded ventilation, while fires raging in different parts of the fort suggested an atmosphere of further oppressiveness. The prisoners were packed so tightly that the door was difficult to close. One of the soldiers stationed at the veranda was offered 1,000 rupees to have them removed to a larger room. He went away but returned saying it was impossible. The bribe was then doubled and he made a second attempt with a like result. The Nawab was asleep and no one dared wake him. By 9 o'clock, several had died and many more were delirious. A frantic cry for water now became general, and one of the guards, more compassionate than his fellows, caused some water to be brought to the bars, where Mr. Holwell and two or three others received it in their hats and passed it to the men behind. In their impatience to secure it, nearly all of it was spilled, and the little they drank only seemed to increase their thirst. Self control was soon lost. Those in remote parts of the room struggled to reach the window, and a fearful tumult ensued in which the weakest were trampled or pressed to death. They raved, fought, prayed, and blasphemed, and many fell exhausted on the floor where suffocation put an end to their torments. About 11 o'clock, the prisoners began to drop off fast, at length. At 6 in the morning, Siraj ud-Daulah awoke and ordered the door to be opened. Of the 146, only 23 uh, remained alive, and they were either stupefied or raving. Fresh air soon revived them, and the commander was taken before the Nawab, who expressed no regret for what had occurred and gave no other sign of sympathy than ordering the Englishmen a chair and a glass of water. Notwithstanding this indifference, some of the others, believed this was a deliberate mark of cruelty from the Nawab. Now, in the aftermath, they were freed, and after this, the British in Madras get the response, and this is when Lieutenant Colonel Robert Clive is sent from Madras to defeat them, and we are gonna see a pretty decisive battle in his favor taking place, which is the Battle of Plassey. But Craig, did you read a little bit of Robert Clive?
Uh, no, I didn't. I have a portrait of him. If you want to say a bit about him.
Yeah, if do you mind if you could just bring up the portrait, then I'll. I had the exact same paper, picture actually of
Oh,
Clive. So Robert Clive, who was ennobled as the first Baron Clive, was the first British governor of the Bengal presidency and has widely been credited for laying the foundation of the British East India Company rule in Bengal. He began as an office clerk for the East India Company in 1744, which would have made him 19 years of age at the time. And he, however, after getting caught up in the military action during the fall of Madras, he joins the private army of the company. He rose to the ranks and was, he wins the Battle of Plassey, and in return for, the events that will take place, he was made a pretty rich man. And when he left India in January 1767, he returned back to England with a fortune of £401,000, which in today's money is just about 68 million.
jeez, nice.
That's I definitely like that money. And he was actually the one who suggested that the English, instead of trying to take direct rule, follow the French route of going through indirect rule via puppet governments. And this is what he would be doing that would lead to the British dominion of the subcontinent. So that is just like, the bit of the history of Robert Clive. I'm just going to bring up a map first. Actually, first get the map up, then I'll be able to share it. Just one moment. Yeah, just bringing up the map. So as I mentioned earlier, the now Lieutenant Colonel Clive is sent up to, take it back to uh, the Nawab, and this is where his policy of indirect rule works. He knows he does not have enough troops to win in a fair fight. When I get to the troop disposition, you will know why. So, what Clive does is he decides to talk to one of the uncles of the Nawab. All right. He talks to this man called Mir Jafar, and he kind of like bribes him and several other commanders. And the promise was very simple: you betray him, I put you on the throne. What do you think will
Not a
happen
bad
with that?
bribe. I
Yeah,
don't think it would
and
go too well, but you know.
but there was existing discontent, and that is because this young Sirajudullah, he kind of ruled with a really big iron fist. So already had the merchant and other nobility of the of his province and realm. They're not too happy with him, anyways, right? Especially compared to the relatively longer rule of his grandfather, where they enjoyed a lot more, uh, you know, uh, freedoms and such. So the conspirators, were they came onto they came into the order and decided that all right, this is a good offer, we accept. Now, the true on paper, there is no way Robert Clive should have won this battle. The Battle of Plassey, it pitted 35,000 Bengal infantry, 16 to 18,000 cavalry, and 53 artillery pieces, uh, which were between 32 24-pounders and the rest being 18-pounder guns. And these were provided by the French, because if they get to give you a fuck you to the English, they are always going to do that. It's kind of like the Patriot scene, right? Remember that Frenchman who says like, "Where else will I kids shoot a few redcoats, maybe a few when they're sleeping."
Yeah.
But ultimately, we are talking about like 50 guns and an army that is north of 50 to 53,000 soldiers. The English army and its allies, they have 850 European or European descent of infantry armed with guns, 100 gunners, 50 sailors, 8 cannons, 6 are field artillery pieces, and 2 are howitzers, and 2,100 Indian sepoys. A total force strength of 3,100 men.
I don't
Now,
see how
on
they're gonna
the
win this.
now on the march to the approach, Clive is joined by Major Kilpatrick, and they combine their forces. The army goes to Murishabad on 13th June, and then Clive sets out a message, declaring his intention to march to refer to their complaints. So the battle, which is in June, it's taking place in June. So he's already told them that he's gonna go there, and the Indian troops march on the shore while the Europeans and their supplies and artillery are towed up the river on 200 boats. And on 14th June, Robert Clive sends his declaration of war. On 15th June, he after ordering an attack on Mir Jafar's palace, uh, you know, Siraj gets sorry, I misread my notes. Just after the declaration of war comes from the British. Siraj is actually not completely stupid. He suspects his uncle is in the conspiracy to get him in. He actually attacks his uncle's palace. But then, first of all, the approach of the British catches him off guard. His uncle then promises not to join the British in the field of battle. He then ordered the entire uh, army on the 15th of June to move towards Clive's position, which he takes place over here on the road. But the army was delayed for 1 week because none of the soldiers wanted to leave until they are paid their dues. I don't know. I thought the only mercenaries gave you this problem, not citizen soldiers. Now, this is the British reach a place, Polti, which is 90 kilometers north of the strategically located fort of Katwa, and that fort, had a lot of grain stores and such. So that's where they try to set up their camp. And this is where Clive has a dilemma. Okay, once they reach Katwa, he knows that the Nawab has reconciled with Mir Jafar and had posted him on one flank of his army. Now, Mir Jafar has sent messages to Clive that says, "I'm going to honor our agreement and I'll betray my liege lord. In return, you put me onto the throne." Right? Who cares about family when the throne is in question? And Clive decided to refer this problem to the officers and held a council of war on the 21st of June. The question Clive puts is whether, in the current situations without other assistance, should they cross and attack the Nawab directly, or should they fortify their position in Katwa and trust to the assistance from the Marathas or some Indian powers? And it was approximately a two-thirds to one-third decision in favor of not taking immediate action, whereas Major Coote is the one person who, and the one-third, uh, who said that they should cross and take over. However, after a 1 hour recess, the army does cross over, as we can see on the map. And at 1 o'clock, at 1 a.m. on the 23rd of June, they reached a destination and occupied this adjoining mangrove grove, which was 730 meters long and 270 meters wide, and enclosed by a ditch and mud wall. And it was length is angled against the river diagonally, and the Nawab's army's already been in place in this kind of semicircle formation that you could see. This is where that they're kind of like having a ring around them. They've been there already for 26 hours and have set up. Now, the battle begins on the daybreak of 23rd when the army emerges from the Nawab's army emerges from its camp and starts marching with 30,000 infantry. It's a mismatch. They have matchlocks, they have swords, pikes, whatever. Cavalry, which is about 60 to 80,000, they're armed with swords or long spears. And they also have the French artillery. And as Clive watches, the army is approaching at an arc, as the semicircle and closing in. The right arm was commanded by a man called Raj Dolab, the center by Ya Lutuf Khan, and the left arm, which is also the closest to the British, Mir Jafar, the conspirator. Now, this is pretty, I think that's the only thing that probably gives Clive some a hope. At 8 o'clock, the French artillery fire the first shots, which causes two casualties from the Grenadier Company of the British, and then the rest of the artillery opens a heavy bombardment. And the British, with a few guns, open fire in retaliation. And the British, the advance field, the British, right? They did not focus on the artillery. They actually focused on hitting the infantry and cavalry. By after 30 minutes, the British have lost 30 men, which for them it's a big loss. So they retreat behind the grove to kind of shelter themselves. And this also reduce the drop of casualties. 3 hours go by. There's no substantial progress from both sides. And the British make the decision that they're going to hold position till night and try to make an night attack, the Parmenian route, as Alexander would call it. And it is at this moment a massive rainstorm occurs, and the British quickly use tarpaulins and cover their ammunitions while the Nawab's army does not do anything. So their gunpowder has become useless while the British keep their gunpowder integrity intact. And then as the rain subsides, uh, one of the commanders of the Nawabs, Mir Madan Khan, he assumes that the British are going to be, they face the same, that their guns are useless. He leads a cavalry charge. And the British, now seeing the charge, quickly load their guns and open fire with grape shot. The cavalry is annihilated by that because that's a shotgun on steroids. And this causes Siraj to panic uh, because Mir Madan Khan was considered Siraj's most trustworthy and best commander. This is when Siraj tries to ask his uncle, you know, uh, for help, and he even like flings his turban onto the ground, which is saying you got to defend it, right? So it's kind of like putting all that symbolism in place, and his uncle decided to just say, uh, I'm going to help, but immediately sent word of this encounter to Clive. So he's playing, for time. And then Siraj is now advised to return to the main city and leave the battles to the general. And he withdraws from the battlefield now with 2,000 men. And Mir Jafar and his allies now control 35 to 36,000 of the remaining soldiers. And they are not going to fight. And when it takes place, the loyalists are completely. So sorry, I had a power cut. Just switch off the camera for a bit.
Yeah, no
Craig,
problem.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry, there was a lag. Yeah, there was a lag. I apologize. Now, this is when the British then began to move towards in an attack. They are using their cannons in full flow. They have better guns, and the British kind of also suffer their most casualties, but focus their three-prong attack on the loyalist forces on their section. And once the loyalists are defeated, well, it's game over. The British at the Battle of Plassey suffered a total of 27 killed and 50 wounded, whereas the Nawab's loyalists suffered about 500 men killed or wounded. Still a pretty decisive victory. Now, what happens in the aftermath is, Siraj is overthrown and executed by his own officers, and Mir Jafar honors his commitment and will, you know, keep a good relationship with the British for a few years only. By 1759, he is also in open war with the British, and the Brits themselves decide to, overthrow him and the Dutch and replace him with his son-in-law. I suppose if you don't find the right ruler, just keep trying till you get one you want get. Now, this battle was the most important for the British East India Company because they now have control of Bengal. This is their first major stronghold and a pretty rich one as well. And not only are they just influencing just around their fortress of Calcutta, they control the province now. That is the significance of the Battle of Plassey and its aftermath. And coincidentally, the Battle of Plassey and Chinsura, where the British defeated the Dutch as well, was part of this event in the Seven Years' War, which is called the Annus Mirabilis, which is Latin for wonderful year. Because this is the year the 7 Years' War changed for Britain in all theaters. So I think, Craig, as you remember, as you will probably correct me if I'm wrong, by 1759, the French in Nouvelle France were in full retreat
Yeah.
against the British and their allies. We we saw how they've taken the British have now conquered Plassey and taken control Bengal. In the West Indies, Britain it succeeds in the invasion of Guadeloupe. There is a battle of Minden by the British and Hanoverian forces, where they defeat a much larger French army. The British have not attempted, they've gained naval superiority against the French because apparently the French believe that they can just send an army across the English Channel without using warships.
Yeah. It's Operation Sea Lion Zero.
So this was, I think, the year you could say the war really turned in the favor of the British. Now, what happens is in 1758 and 59, the British and French now start fighting in the Carnatic region. So the fight has now gone into south because, as you saw, the French and British headquarters. Let me just bring up that map. As you can see, Pondicherry and Madras. It's not clearly clear on this map, but Madras and Pondicherry are really close. Pondicherry being slightly to the south, as you can see, right? You can't have two powerful bastions next to each other. So we have the Siege of Madras, where the French decide to attack the city, and they come with a force of 8,000 soldiers, 4,000 being Europeans. So this is now becoming almost a quasi European conflict because while Clive's tactics to win Bengal were more unorthodox, now we're kind of getting more towards disciplined line fire kind of battles and sieges that are going to be taking place. So just it's just on a much smaller scale if you were to consider the troop numbers. And the siege began in December 1758. So on 14th December, the French enter one of the two districts, which is called the Black Town, where the native population kind of lived and was unfortified. And then you had the White Town, which was where the Europeans lived. Now, during this, the French entered on 14th December unopposed here, and they think that it's not defended, and they start the age-old military tactic of looting the enemy camp. The British launched a sortie with 600 men, and they scattered the French, and the French were driven out for a while with casualties of both sides of over 300. Now, even though the British kind of took a bigger loss, if you would consider it as a percentage of their troops, they lost about 10% of their troops, since 300 dead were reported on each side. And the French, it would be not even 5%. The morale loss on the French was even more significant. And the two French commanders, which were the con, the, con one sec, I'm gonna the Comte de Lally, who was the French army officer, and then the Marquis de Bouzy Castelnau. I'm sorry if I've horribly mispronounced his names. They began to fight, and all I can see Craig in his head is probably thinking Verdun and Montcalm.
Yep, it really is kind of the dichotomy is there.
And so what we had is, once they start arguing, the French, anyways, then uh, step up the bombardment, ready to besiege the Madras fort, which is Fort St. George. The problem is they had the guns, but they forgot one thing: ammunition. So the ammunition for the guns would not come till 2nd of January in 1759. And despite a 5-day bombardment and infantry assaults, the British defenses were largely intact. And they even survived a pretty strong mine explosion. So, okay, at least Fort George was way better defended than Fort William ever was, and definitely kept in better repair,
Hmm.
not breaking away sections for lighting and ventilation.
Yeah.
And the lack of any progress really destroyed the morale of the French soldiers, and many just deserted, and almost 200 even just switched sides. They joined the British defense. So that's not really good, looking good for your PR. And the British sepoy commander of one of the Madras regiments was also really harassing the supply lines. And the French had to further withdraw and drop away their forces as well to, keep their supply lines intact, because, well, you and I have discussed so many times on our various episodes, no supplies, no victory.
Yep. I just want to point out to the
And
audience who can't see this. It's I put up a portrait of the fort itself. It's actually very impressive.
it
This would be
is.
very intimidating for a siege. Yeah.
I don't know. I actually, come to think of it, because I actually lived in that city when I was a kid. I don't know if I saw some of the fortifications on beaches, but remember some structures by the beaches that kind of would be like in these bastion shapes or something like that. It's a bit hazy,
Oh.
but then again, I was like 3 or 4 years old, so just don't hold that against me. Now, despite this, attrition is a thing, and the French finally, after several more weeks, heading into February, finally make headway with the main bastion destroyed, a breach opened, and most of the cities actually gutted. And it was at this moment a Royal Navy frigate successfully blockades runs the French defenses, as you showing an image of it, and that drops in money for the defenders and about a company of extra soldiers,
Oh, there we go.
which it does improve the morale of the British, but not more than the news that the British fleet under Admiral George Pocock was on its way down. And this is when Lally, Comte de Lally, the army commander, decides it's like an all or nothing assault. And They try it, but on 16th February, the siege is ended because six British vessels arrived carrying 600 troops, and that's when the French decide to cut their losses. So they fail in their attempt to take this major port, and after that, this kind of theater kind of goes, you could say, almost into a lull as the British just take one of the French forts at Musalipatam. It's just a relatively smaller fort. And in 1760, we have the Battle of Wandiwash. Just give me a second. I'm gonna just bring up a map of that battle. This was, you could call it, the last major encounter of the Third Carnatic War. It We had about 2,000 men on the British side. Sorry, 4,000. Sorry, you had 2,000, almost 2,000 European infantry and 2,100 Indian sepoys, with almost 300 cavalry and 26 guns. The Comte de Lally, with aid from the Marathas, had 2,200, almost 2,300 European infantry, 1,300 sepoys, 300 European cavalry, and more crucially, 3,000 Maratha infantry. As I mentioned earlier, the Marathas were no real friends of the British, and they viewed the French as more trustworthy for them. Uh, so I think an analogy I read was, if people say the Battle of Plassey was a fixed match, the Battle of Wandiwash was a professional heavyweight slugfest. So the battle was a classic line of battle. So in the sense, they were fighting no different than what Frederick, Marshal Dawn are fighting over in Europe. We had the two lines trade, are going to trade the volleys. So the Comte de Lally, who's impatient with the artillery duel, he orders a bayonet charge with his regiment, which is the Lorient, and they managed to break through the first British line. But the British, under their commander, Lieutenant General Sir Eyre Coote, they hold their position. Discipline holds. They have not completely routed. And the British just kind of pour heavy, devastating fire into the French columns. And this is where the British get probably the biggest stroke of luck. One shot hits an ammunition wagon.
That's
After
lucky.
the yeah, and this is right in the French camp. It killed dozens, but more importantly, the sepoys and the rear completely panicked and fled. And this is where General Coote sees the momentum and orders in advance. And the French are, they're completely routed. At the end of the battle, the British had just under 200 casualties, whereas the French had 3 to 4 times as much. And it was a big psychological catastrophe for the French, because the French would now retreat to Pondicherry, and the British are gonna besiege this their stronghold for almost 4.5 months, and it's gonna be a gruesome long siege to starve them out. And ultimately, with no hope of reinforcements from France coming, since the British have taken naval supremacy, and I don't think the French Prime Minister was optimistic about sending unescorted barges to Pondicherry from France.
Yeah, doesn't sound like a good idea.
The the city Pondicherry surrenders. The British literally razed the city to the ground. I guess you could call it the retaliation for the Siege of Madras. And this is also where you know, Eyre Coote showed that the British trained Indian sepoys can also stand toe to toe and hold their discipline with European regulars, which kind of made him a bit of a rock star for the British. And
Would you say this is the foundation of the British Indian Army?
yeah, it would definitely be the foundation.
Hmm.
Because otherwise, if you really look at it, the Europeans never had a high opinion of local troops. I'm pretty sure even like Montcalm, Braddock in North America, if they had regulars of their nation's armies, they believe they would steamroll through everything.
Yeah, they both shared that trait.
And they would also probably believe that the native troops have no way of. They will say that the natives will only win if they kind of resort to, like, hit and run, unconventional tactics.
Yeah.
But General Coote and his Indian sepoys, they held even though the line broke, which can happen in any battle. But he rallied them and they maintained their discipline and cohesion. That is why they won the battle. So this is where the foundations truly were laid.
Hmm.
Probably not in its case, because until 1857, India is technically under a company rule. It's not under the British crown. But that, you could say, would be the end of the Third Carnatic War and the India theatre. The British ascendancy is guaranteed now. The French will recover all their possessions from the Treaty of Paris, but the main clause is they're not allowed to fortify anything. So that kind of effectively stymies their power. And to add insult, I think a few years after the war, I think it's 1767, the French East Indies Company just is declared bankrupt.
So they're done.
But oh yeah,
Did the British buy them out?
they no, it was actually, if I'm not mistaken, it was the King of France, Louis. Um, so I think uh, with they had their Asian king trade privileges suspended in 1769, not 67. My bad. Uh, King Louis required the company to transfer its assets to the state.
Oh,
So this
okay.
was
So it just
about
came to the
30
state.
million livres, and he got only 15% of the, as like, the assets which were valued at 30 million. He only got 15% back because he had to pay off the debts first.
Yeah, that didn't go well for the French.
I guess maybe that's why Napoleon really wanted to sell Louisiana.
Well, again, like I keep saying to audience members, is like there was nothing in Louisiana. If you look at today, you can find remnants of the population, the Cajun people, famously, who speak the most bizarre French. If anyone's seen YouTube videos, it is incredible hearing Cajun people speak French. It's very different, but they were like outposts manned by a few people, and it was just mostly native allies. So there's nothing really to trade.
Yeah, but I guess this is where we can end today's episode. It's not as many battles and conflicts or players as compared to North America, but in the grand sense, it does like how Britain would secure itself in North America, at least until the American Revolutionary War. Britain has now secured itself in the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
William Pitt is definitely a very happy man right now.
Well, I did because I was trying to read in the background. I don't know if it's Comte de Lally or there was another guy. One of these guys ends up fighting the American Revolutionary War, so he gets revenge on the British. I forget which one it is.
Uh,
Yeah,
was it Lally or his
no, I think it was
second in
the other guy. I
command?
think it was the other guy. I just came across that because I was looking for artwork on the battles itself. This is sparingly some. Yeah, this is a fascinating episode. I knew very little about this. My knowledge for any of Indian history is all it's related to the Opium Wars. So it's like this is kind of just
I
before that's
think,
going to kick off.
true enough, actually, like, I'll also admit I don't have that much knowledge because most of my personal likes has always been antiquity.
Mhm.
And then I'm just kind of expanded to Napoleon, 30 Years War, medieval ages. Not really
Yeah.
looked into Southeast Asia or even Asia beyond the Sengoku. Otherwise, what
A
I know is just the Russo-Japanese War and World War II.
a big gap for me was always the American Civil War. I just never was my fancy. I've only recently really dabbled into it because I was reading the biography on Grant, which is it's an outstanding book. It's incredibly long. Like it's one of the thickest books I've ever seen, but definitely recommend that's a good read because Grant was a
I
very
just
interesting person.
I like the fact that this diseases was so bad in the American Civil War that he actually would lose more men in frontal assaults and kept
Yeah,
attacking Lee's positions just so that to minimize his losses.
yeah. Grant the meat grinder guy. I mean, well, anyways, if we ever tackle Civil War stuff, I would invite War yeah, I'll invite Warhawk. We have a writer over at KNG who's like the greatest American Civil War guy I've ever met in my life. He's an encyclopedia. He can do everything, and that'd be cool to like have him
I
tell us some of his stuff.
Yeah, I think that'll definitely be a series episode for sure.
Yeah. But
Because
stating all that, before I
yep,
let the audience go, please, if you're not checking us out on YouTube, do so. We're putting a lot of effort here to put up the maps, put up the portraits, and make this a visual experience. And of course, my shameless plug, if you'd like to further support us, you can consider checking out the YouTube membership at the Pacific War Channel on YouTube or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/Pacific War Channel. They're identical. Prices are exactly the same. What you get is exactly the same. So feel free to go to either. You get access to the exclusive podcast series. There's going to be 34 episodes. Yeah, it's 34 episodes now by this point. An ongoing one comes out each month. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for subjects I will tackle next. And I'm going to be putting up a poll this month, and I think I'm going to put some curveballs in some like really interesting, weird history stuff because I want to get some different things going.
I'm gonna be waiting for the poll because then I'll have to go to your community post on your channel and definitely put my vote in.
Yeah, and if
So
you
I'm gonna
if
be
you
interested to
go
see
and
what's there.
comment, if you are someone on the Patreon or on the YouTube membership and you comment that you want something to be covered, it's like a 90% chance I'll cover it the next month because I'm looking to please here. So I've had a lot of requests that turned into full series, like really cool ones, and I'm always looking for audience feedback. And it doesn't have
I
to be for
always say
support.
this. I always say this. Craig did the entire podcast of the history of the Big E only on like after I kept pestering him for quite a while.
That was a long one.
It was a
And
good one.
I tried to summarize the end half of it because it's like it came down to what battles was Biggie not in during World War II. It's kind of like what you're looking at that
Well,
point.
there's a
But
there's a
yeah,
reason it's the most decorated ship of the United States Navy.
absolutely. I don't think I'm not under an NDA to like not state anything that's coming out soon, but I shouldn't say anything. Anyways, Kings and Generals, they got a lot of views for an episode I did recently covering the emergence of the Dreadnought. It's like actually it's a 3D episode to look at how the ship looked and all the parts, and then I interloped it with like a history of the evolution of warships. It did so well, even though the guy, one of the managers at KNG, was angry. He didn't think it was going to do well, so he was like, "Oh God, we have to do more of these." So I'm going to be doing a kind of a mini series on different ships that represent the eras, like the Ironclads, for example. Hint, hint. Probably going to be doing
Or the
the first
French,
aircraft carrier.
the horrible French battleships.
Yeah, I'd be probably covering some of that. I don't think I'm going to be doing ancient stuff because apparently KNG did try to do some like some things and it just didn't do well. But I'm doing a
But
lot of naval shit now.
I hope you are you gonna maybe talk about the Montana class?
Sure, could tackle
Yeah,
anything.
even though it never existed.
Yeah, no, there's I mean, if people wanted like an episode on like what I find so hilarious, I play World of Warships and it's super biased to Russia. Like it's unbelievably biased to Russia. And all they have is paper ships that I'm sure like some drunk once scribbled on a blueprint paper, never saw the light of day. And like the Russian battleship classes, it's such a joke. Like Russia had a single battleship in World War II, and it was a
Did
British
they?
like
I
free
just
dreadnought lent to them.
wait. I remember the Russians having what do you call, like some submarine forces, but I'm like, wait, Russia had a navy?
The one thing, the Russian submarines were extremely advanced. Russia was like the pioneers of what do you call it, doing electric and diesel in their subs. I think that's how it was. Yeah, and they actually had an impressive submarine fleet, but they didn't have enough of them. I mean, in the Baltic, they barely even touched the Kriegsmarine, but whatever. That's for a discussion for another day. Yeah. Thank you, Gaurav, for this one, and we're going to be finishing up the 7 Years War
And
series
I get to
pretty
talk
soon.
about my favorite piece of crap from the period of Russia, Peter the Third.
Oh, there you go. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Till next time.